Okay, today we're going to make a really delicious squash lentil soup. What we have is, I've got some olive oil in the bottom of the pan, and we're going to start with our mirepoix of onions first, always. I'm going to get that in the pan, and then I'm going to sprinkle them with salt, and then I'll talk about the rest of the recipe. So once those onions cook for a little bit, we're going to add our carrots and celery and let that simmer. We're also going to add 2 other aromatics to this. We're going to add garlic, got about 3 cloves chopped there, and some ginger. This is about a tablespoon of ginger, okay? You could add more if you want. So about this soup is super flexible. You could have it spicy, you could add chili or cumin to it. You could have it with no spice, just really simple, just salt and pepper is great in it. I've made this soup, I've thrown some apples in it, I put apple cider in it. It's super flexible. I'm not going to use stock today. I'm actually going to thin the soup with water, and then I'm also going to add some coconut milk to make it really creamy. The final thing I want to talk about is these little orange lentils. These are a really great addition to any kind of soup. First, they cook really quickly. They're tiny little lentils, okay? They're not really thick or heavy or hard. So they can actually simmer up in about 20 minutes. They add protein and they add fiber, which is really essential, really healthy, and they're really inexpensive. Okay, they're a really great addition. Just a final note with the celery, when I can, I always throw in a few of the inside leaves of the celery. They give it a really great flavor. And then it's just sort of an added herb to have in the soup. So, cooking time, we're going to cook our onions for about 5 minutes before we add our carrots and celery, and I'm going to add the ginger and garlic at the same time. Once those are all in, we're going to add the lentils, we're going to add the squash, and then I'm going to cover it with water and just let it simmer. I'm going to increase the heat to about a medium high, and I'm just going to let it simmer. This soup can cook really easily in about 25 minutes. It's not a long cook. Okay, we'll come back in a few minutes and see where we're at. Okay, our onions are nicely simmering, so I'm going to add my ginger, my garlic, 2 aromatics you're going to love, my celery, my carrots. Going to give that a really good stir. My heat is on medium-low. I'm going to let those cook for just a few minutes. Then I'm going to throw in my lentils and my squash. Cover it with enough water. I want to be able to control the thickness. I can control that easier after it's cooked. I can gauge how thick it is. So I'm just going to add enough water to cover my squash and my lentils. We'll come back in a couple of minutes and we'll get making our soup. Okay, here is our gorgeous soup here. I'm going to add my lentils. That's about a 1/4 cup. You could add more to that if you want more protein and fiber. Absolutely add more. Understand that those lentils need water to get soft. So any liquid you add is going to soak it right up. So you're going to have to play around with your water. You're going to have to look at your soup as it's cooking just to make sure it doesn't get too dried out. If it gets dried out, it's going to scorch on the bottom. So I've added my lentils. I know I love cumin. It's a spice I use a lot for Mexican cooking. Obviously, it's a really common spice also with Indian cooking. It's not spicy, but it just gives a really nice warm flavor that I think is a really beautiful complement to this dish. Having said that, I've made this soup lots of times with just the onions and the garlic and the ginger, and it's really lovely. But you know, sometimes you want a bit more spice in your life. So I'm going to toss that in. Give that a stir. I'm going to add all of my squash. So this is already cut and peeled butternut squash. If you wanted to get a fresh squash and cut into it, obviously you could do that. You could even get what if you had a leftover roasted squash? You could use that to use in your soup. Scoop it out away from the skin and grab it that way. You could also use canned squash if you didn't want to deal with any of that stuff. Okay, I'm going to throw all of that in. Give it a good stir. And so now I'm going to cover it with water. Just enough water to cover it. And now I'm going to turn my heat up to medium-high, and I'm just going to let it go. So here is our delicious squash soup. Now, this soup has been cooking for 20 minutes. You can see the squash is really poached and full. If you're not sure if the squash is cooked through, always just take a little piece out and give it a little taste, okay, to make sure make sure it's not undercooked, for sure. So to this, I'm going to add my coconut milk. And my coconut milk's a little bit, I'm trying not to spray myself. It completely separates, as you can see. All the fat is on the top. There we go. And now the rest is in. So I'm going to get that coconut milk in. And then I'm going to puree it. I'm going to use a hand blender just because I find it really easy instead of transferring it into a blender. But of course you could do that. If you transfer it to the blender, just a couple of little hints or reminders, please make sure the bottom of your blender is really secure, like that bottom mechanism is tight on. If it's not tight, everything will spill out. You'll lose your soup and you could actually burn yourself. And the second is you're not going to be able to put all of this soup into the blender unless you have an enormous blender. So you're going to have to do it in stages. So you're going to have to find a place to put the soup in the meantime. You're going to blend some, put it in another pot if you are not eating it right away and you want to reheat it. I'm going to set this aside. I've got my hand blender and I'm going to just keep it not straight down. I'm going to have it at a slight angle, and that's going to create a little bit of a tornado. Whirlpool. There's the soup. Before I serve it, I'm going to give it a final little taste. Yummo. I'm going to season it with a little bit of salt, some fresh ground pepper, and that's a really very gentle, mild squash soup. It's got some nice protein in it with the lentils. If you wanted to make it a stronger soup, you could, of course, add spices. You could add more curried spices. Garam masala is really nice in that. You could add a little bit of chili. You could add some cinnamon to it, or you could have it really, really mellow and warm. It's a perfect, easy, fast soup. Lots of great things in it. Enjoy.